Some stories were not erased by chance. They were erased because whoever touched them was never the same again. For weeks, I debated if I should even start telling this. But silence only protects the ones who hide in it. So, if you're listening now, if you're reading these words, then remember, you chose this. The documents reached me in fragments. First, an email without a sender. Then a padded envelope delivered to my office with no return address. Inside, photocopies, photographs, transcripts of police reports, even voice notes on cassette tapes, all centered around two children who, according to official records, never existed. Their names appeared again and again: Elias and Mara Calderon, twins, born in 1987 in San Esteban del Valle, Hidalgo. And yet, no birth certificates, no baptism records, no school enrollment files, as if they were smoke, shadows that had been given names. The first record comes from a Valentine's morning in 1998. A 10-year-old girl, Lucia Calderon Morales, found dead in her room by her mother. No wounds, no forced entry, no signs of illness. Her body frozen in a posture of eerie serenity, palms open on her chest, her lips stretched in a smile too wide, too deliberate, and her eyes, wide open, dry, staring into nothing. Beside her, on the wooden floor, was a symbol drawn in ash, a double triangle intersected, almost like an hourglass. The police dismissed it as a smudge from the fireplace, but her mother swore she had cleaned that room the night before, spotless. What struck investigators most was what they found when they entered. At the foot of the bed, sitting silently, were two children, Elias and Mara, the cousins of the victim, 11 years old. Not a tear in their eyes, not a sound from their lips, just a stillness that one officer later described as too perfect, like they were waiting for us. One of the police reports I read had been censored heavily, entire paragraphs blacked out, but a surviving note in the margin caught my eye. Do not engage directly. Subjects under Category 4. C. Mimetic. That word, mimetic, sent me into weeks of searching. It doesn't exist in medical texts, not in criminology, not even in folklore. But in a declassified fragment of an old intelligence glossary, I found a definition: mimetic, an organism capable of replicating human appearance and behavior with coherence, but without genetic correspondence. Subject is indistinguishable from kin. Avoid contact. Containment not possible. Almost as if the official stance was this: they looked like children, but no one could prove they were. I needed more. I tracked down one of the officers from that case. His name was Commander Raul Herrera, retired and living quietly in a town far from Hidalgo. At first he refused to talk, threatened to hang up the phone, but when I told him I had the documents, there was silence. Then a low voice: "You don't want to know what we saw that night?" I met him 2 weeks later in a roadside cafe. His hand shook as he stirred his coffee, his eyes darting to every corner as if expecting someone to appear. "They weren't normal," he said, his voice trembling. "Never were. They mirrored each other perfectly. If the boy blinked, the girl smiled. If the girl tilted her head, the boy did it half a second later, like an echo. But it wasn't play. It wasn't natural. When I asked him what happened after the girl's death, he refused to speak. Only one line left his lips, whispered so low I almost didn't catch it. Don't look for them. Nobody ever found their bodies. I left the cafe shaken. Herrera's warning echoed in my mind, but warnings never stopped me before. If anything, they pulled me deeper. I had to find someone from San Esteban del Valle who remembered Elias and Mara. The town itself was difficult to reach, tucked between dry hills and half-forgotten roads. Many of the houses looked abandoned, roofs collapsing, walls covered in vines. The air was heavy, stale, as if the town itself resented visitors. I started at the church. Every Mexican town keeps its memory in the parish: baptismal records, marriage certificates, deaths. But when I asked the elderly priest about the Calderon twins, his expression turned pale. He shuffled through the drawers reluctantly, pulling out a thin folder with shaking hands. "There should be records," he muttered. "Every child is baptized here, except them. We wrote their names once, but the pages are gone." I flipped through. Torn sheets, water stains, even scorch marks on the edges of the paper. In the margin of one old page, faint but still visible, someone had written in pencil, "Do not inscribe the hollow ones." I asked the priest what that meant. He looked away. His voice dropped to a whisper. They had no godparents, no baptism, no God could claim them. I pressed further, and finally, with a trembling sigh, he told me of the funeral. It was the burial of Lucia, the little girl who had died smiling. The entire town came, but when the coffin was lowered, Elias and Mara stood at the edge of the grave. They didn't cry, they didn't blink, they just stared down as the dirt covered her. And then, as the last shovel of earth fell, the boy whispered something. No one heard the words clearly, but the girl repeated them, syllable by syllable, like a broken echo. The priest stopped here. His eyes filled with tears. His voice nearly broke. I left them standing there, but when I looked back a moment later, they were gone. Not walked away, gone. And the earth over the grave, it had shifted, as if someone had moved under it. I carried his words with me as I left the church, but they weren't the last testimony I would hear. In a crumbling house near the plaza, I found Doña Rosario, a woman who had been the twins' school teacher in 1993. Her eyes clouded with age, but when I spoke their names, her hands clenched around the wooden armrest of her chair. "Elias and Mara," she whispered. "We called them the Mirrors." She described their first day in class. The other children laughed, cried, played, but the twins only sat in the corner, motionless, staring at each other. When asked a question, they answered in unison, with the same tone, the same pause between words. If one wrote a letter on the board, the other's hand would twitch, tracing the same shape in the air. "They had no friends," Rosario said. "The other children avoided them. It wasn't cruelty, it was instinct, like animals avoiding fire." But one incident stood out above the rest. During recess, when the yard was full of shouting and games, Rosario noticed that Elias and Mara were still in the classroom, sitting across from each other, whispering. She crept closer, just enough to hear. "It wasn't Spanish," she said. "It wasn't any language I knew. The syllables were wrong, broken. The sounds made my stomach turn." When the twins noticed her, they stopped instantly. Their faces split into identical smiles, too wide, too knowing. That was the last day she allowed herself to be alone with them. Before I left, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "They aren't gone," she said. "If you look too long, you'll find them. And if they notice you noticing them, you'll never be rid of them." The more I listened, the clearer the pattern became. Every memory of Elias and Mara came with silence, with fear, with absences that no one dared to explain. It wasn't just Lucia's death. There were more. I found a retired electrician named Don Alvaro, who had worked at the primary school in the late 90s. He welcomed me into his workshop, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal. At first, he denied remembering the twins, but when I showed him a faded class photo I had recovered from the parish archive, he went rigid. In the group of smiling children, there they were, Elias and Mara, standing side by side at the edge of the frame. Identical posture, identical faces, both staring straight at the camera. No smile, no expression, just blank. Don Alvaro exhaled slowly, lit a cigarette, and began to speak. There was a blackout once. All the classrooms lost power at the same time. Every fuse blown, every line down, except one, their classroom. The lights in there never flickered, not once. I checked the panel myself. Impossible. As if someone had protected it. He paused, his hand shaking with the cigarette. And do you know what I heard when I walked by that room? Whispering, but not like children. The sound, it was layered, one voice on top of the other, echoing, like they were speaking from inside each other. I asked if he had told anyone. He gave a bitter laugh. Who would believe me? A drunk electrician saying 2 kids broke the laws of physics? But his eyes betrayed the truth. He believed it himself, even now. Later, in the town's plaza, I met Doña Mercedes, who had lost her son in 1994. His name was Tomas. He was 9. He disappeared on his way home from school. The case was closed as a runaway. But when I asked about Elias and Mara, her hands trembled violently, and she bit her lip until it bled. My boy used to say they followed him, she whispered. Not outside, inside. He said he'd see them in mirrors. He'd close his eyes and still feel them watching. Then one day, he told me, if I dream about them again, I won't wake up. The next morning, Tomas was gone. His shoes were still by the bed, the window locked from the inside. The only trace was a small drawing in his notebook, 2 stick figures holding hands inside a triangle. When I showed the drawing to another family who had also lost a child that same year, they froze. Their daughter had left behind the exact same image. It wasn't coincidence. Something tied all the vanishings to the twins. Back at my hotel, I spread out the documents on the bed. Police reports, testimonies, newspaper clippings. Each disappearance marked with the same unofficial annotation. Mimetic involvement suspected. Observation only. Observation only. They never intervened. They never stopped them. Which meant the authorities knew. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture formed. Elias and Mara weren't just children who scared their classmates. They were a pattern, a shadow, a presence that grew with every life lost. And San Esteban del Valle was their nest. I knew the town would only take me so far. Memories warp. People hide behind silence. To understand what Elias and Mara truly were, I needed something colder, something official. For weeks I wrote letters, filed requests, bribed clerks. Most doors slammed shut the moment I mentioned San Esteban del Valle. But eventually, a man I'll call S agreed to meet me. He had worked as an archivist for Mexico's intelligence agency back in the late 90s, when it was still called CICIN. We met at dusk in a parking lot outside Querétaro. He was nervous, chain-smoking, his eyes bloodshot. From under his jacket, he pulled out a folder wrapped in brown paper. I shouldn't even have this, he whispered. They purged most of the files years ago, burned them, but I kept one copy, not out of courage, out of fear, because if I threw it away, I thought, they might come looking for me. Inside the folder were memos, surveillance notes, photographs. At the top of every page, stamped in red, Mimetic, Class 4, C. The first page defined the term more precisely than I had ever seen. Mimetic entity. A. Non-human organism capable of reproducing coherent human form and behavior. Lacks verifiable genetic origin. May infiltrate family lines, simulating kinship bonds. Subjects may exhibit parasitic qualities, emotional manipulation, psychic suggestion, unexplained physical anomalies. Direct engagement not recommended, containment impossible. Protocol, observation until disappearance. I felt a chill run down my spine. Until disappearance. It was as if the government already knew these things would vanish on their own. One memo described field agents sent to monitor Elias and Mara in 1995. The report stated that the twins were observed walking hand in hand through the market of San Esteban. The agents followed them for 2 hours, recording their behavior. They noted something strange. In every reflective surface, shop windows, a puddle, even a polished kettle, the twins appeared slightly out of sync. A blink delayed, a smile missing, a hand held at the wrong angle. Another report mentioned voice recordings. When slowed down, Elias and Mara's voices revealed frequencies far below human range, tones that caused nausea and headaches in the analysts who reviewed them. The final page in the folder was the one that nearly made me stop the investigation altogether. A photograph, grainy, black and white, taken in 1996. A group of school children posed in front of a mural, and there, at the edge, Elias and Mara. Same posture, same expression, but directly behind them stood another child, a boy whose face was blurred, not by motion, but by something else. The file identified him as Ismael Rivera, age 9. He vanished 1 week after that photo was taken. In the margin of the report, handwritten in shaky ink, were 3 words. They choose one. I looked at S, my throat dry. What does that mean? I asked. He crushed his cigarette into the pavement, his face pale. It means you're asking the wrong question, he said. Don't ask what they are. Ask why they were here. And then he left me standing in that parking lot, clutching a folder that should not have survived the flames. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Perfect. Identical. Waiting. By now, the story of Elias and Mara had consumed me. The folder from Season sat on my desk like a living thing. The phrase, "they choose," one echoed in my mind, a riddle that seemed to hold the key. So I returned to San Esteban del Valle. This time, I wasn't searching for teachers or priests. I wanted the families, the ones who had lost children. I found them reluctantly. Most had moved away. The ones who stayed opened their doors only a crack, speaking in whispers. They didn't want their names recorded, but their memories poured out like wounds reopening. Each of them had lost a child between 1993 and 1997. Boys and girls, ages between 8 and 12. Each disappearance had the same marks. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, no ransom notes. Just a child gone from one day to the next. And in every case, there was a drawing, a crude sketch left behind in a notebook, on a wall, even carved into wood. Always the same shape, a triangle within a triangle, or a twisted hourglass. Sometimes with 2 stick figures drawn at the center, hand in hand. When I laid out the drawings side by side, the similarities were undeniable. Children who never met, separated by years, reproducing the same impossible symbol. One mother, her face gaunt with grief, told me something that froze my blood. The night before my daughter vanished, she woke screaming. She said she saw them in the corner of her room, Elias and Mara. But they weren't children anymore. They were taller, their arms too long, their eyes black. She said they asked her to follow them. The next morning, she was gone. I wanted to dismiss it as nightmare, trauma. But then I remembered the reports, observation until disappearance. The authorities had heard these stories too, and they had done nothing. I pushed deeper into the town's forgotten corners, and in the municipal library, under a stack of newspapers eaten by dust and insects, I found a small journal. The handwriting was cramped, desperate. It belonged to the parish priest before the current one, dated 1996. The entries began ordinary: sermons, weddings, baptisms. Then, halfway through the year, they grew frantic. He wrote of shadows seen in the sacristy, voices whispering in confession when no one was inside. He described children drawing the forbidden symbol in the dirt outside the church, though none claimed to know what it meant. One entry, dated October 12, 1996, stopped me cold. The twins sat in the front pew today. They never move, never blink. I swear one mouthed the prayers before I spoke them, and when the choir sang, their voices matched perfectly, every note, every breath. They are not two, they are one, or worse, they are something trying to be two. The final entry was a single line, written in shaky, uneven letters. The hollow ones will take another before All Saints' Day. After that, the journal ends. The priest disappeared the following month. His replacement never spoke of him again. I left the library shaken, my hands trembling as I closed the book. Everywhere I turned, the trail grew darker, heavier. The missing children, the symbol, the twins at the center of it all, like a black hole swallowing the town's life. And then, finally, I learned what happened in 1998, the year Elias and Mara vanished from San Esteban del Valle forever. I pieced it together from scraps, an officer's lost diary, a farmer's testimony whispered to me after too much mezcal, and the fragments in the Kaizen folder. They all spoke of the same night, August 27th, 1998, the night San Esteban del Valle fell silent. That evening was ordinary at first. The plaza was alive with music, the smell of roasted corn in the air, children running between the stalls. But as the sun went down, clouds gathered unnaturally fast, swallowing the stars. Old-timers said it was like someone had blown out the sky. By midnight, the streets were empty, not out of fear, out of compulsion. People described it later as a weight pressing down on them, forcing them indoors, locking their doors without even realizing why. Dogs hid under tables, birds vanished from the trees, but a few witnesses stayed awake. Don Pedro, a rancher who lived at the edge of town, told me he saw the twins walking down the main road at exactly 3 a.m., hand in hand, barefoot, their eyes reflecting the moon like animals. Behind them trailed a group of children, 5, maybe 6, walking stiffly, silently, as if pulled by invisible strings. Among them was his own nephew, who vanished that night. I tried to shout, Don Pedro said, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my tongue heavy. I could only watch. And when they passed the chapel, the lights inside turned on by themselves. But no one had gone in. Another account came from a woman known only as La Tia Julia, who lived across from the school. She swore she saw the twins enter the building with the children. The doors closed behind them with a slam that shook the walls. Moments later, every window in the school glowed with red light. What happened inside is impossible to confirm. The official police report claims that when officers arrived, the building was empty. But the diary of one officer, buried in the folder S gave me, tells a different story. He wrote that the desks had been arranged in a circle. Ash covered the floor in the shape of the hourglass symbol, and in the center, carved into the wood, was a phrase in a language no one recognized. There were no children inside, no sign of Elias or Mara, only silence and that symbol burning into the floor like it had been branded. But the strangest part was this: every clock in town, wristwatches, wall clocks, even the broken bell tower, stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m. They stayed frozen for 1 full hour before resuming as if nothing had happened. When morning came, families reported their children missing, 7 in total. The police searched for weeks. No bodies, no tracks, no ransom, nothing, just absence. After that night, Elias and Mara were never seen again, not in San Esteban, not anywhere else. It was as if they had dissolved into the earth, taking the children with them. The town slowly emptied in the following years. People whispered of curses, of government cover-ups, of children who still laughed in the streets long after they were gone. By the early 2000s, San Esteban del Valle was nearly a ghost town. And yet, rumors never stopped. Children vanishing in other states, always leaving behind the same symbol. Families swearing they'd seen a pair of twins at the edge of a crowd, in a bus window, in a reflection. Always identical, always watching. The files ended there. The official trail closed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the story hadn't ended at all. I told myself the story had ended in 1998. That's what the files said. That's what the town believed. But the deeper I sank into the documents, the more I realized that endings are a human invention. Things like Elias and Mara don't end. They linger. It began subtly. While reviewing the CISEN folder late one night, I noticed something I had missed before. A blurry photograph of the school desks, arranged in that circle of ash. In the far corner, almost hidden by shadow, there was a reflection on the window glass. 2 small figures standing hand in hand, watching. I thought it was a trick of the light, until I enlarged the image. Their faces were unmistakable: Elias and Mara. The second sign came weeks later. I was driving home after midnight when my radio began to crackle. The frequency jumped, stations blurring into static. Then, beneath the noise, I heard voices, a boy and a girl speaking in unison. Not Spanish, not any language I recognized. The same broken syllables that Doña Rosario, the teacher, had described decades earlier. The broadcast lasted less than a minute. When it ended, my car clock had frozen at 3:17 a.m. I told myself I was tired, overworked, chasing ghosts. But then came the third sign, harder to ignore. One afternoon, sorting through the children's drawings I had collected, I noticed one page I didn't recognize. A triangle drawn in red crayon, 2 stick figures inside, the same symbol as all the others. Only this page hadn't come from the archives. The paper was new. The ink still smelled fresh. I live alone. After that, things accelerated. In the corners of crowds, on subway platforms, in photographs taken by strangers, I started seeing them. 2 children, identical, pale, expressionless. Always in the background, always just far enough that I couldn't confront them. Once, on a rainy evening, I passed a storefront window. My reflection stared back, but I wasn't alone. 2 other reflections stood beside me, Elias and Mara, holding hands, smiling faintly. When I spun around, the street was empty. I don't know when I stopped investigating and started being investigated. It was no longer me following their trail. it was them following mine. Last week, someone slid an envelope under my apartment door. Inside was a single photograph. It showed me, sitting at my desk, surrounded by the files. And behind me, blurry but visible, were two children, standing in the corner, watching. There was no note, no threat, just the image. I don't know how long this story has left. Maybe by telling it, I've invited them closer. Maybe by reading this, you have too. Because every pattern ends the same way. They choose one. I started keeping the door locked, the blinds drawn, lights on even during the day. But some part of me knew it didn't matter. You can't lock the world away from them. It began subtly at first, the sound of footsteps in empty hallways, the faint echo of two children reciting a language no one understands. My dreams filled with ash circles, clocks frozen at 3:17 a.m., and the twins staring silently from the corners. One night, I awoke to a tap on the window. Rain pounded against the glass, but there was something sharper, deliberate. I looked through the curtains and froze. There they were, Elias and Mara, standing in the street, barefoot, hands clasped, eyes locked on mine. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't. The rational part of me screamed that they weren't human, or at least not as we understand it. They weren't children, they were mimetics, and mimetics don't follow rules. I tried to ignore them, to convince myself it was a hallucination. But the next morning, I found something on my desk, a single red crayon spiral, perfect this time, unlike the messy ones from the past, and a note in childish handwriting. You were chosen. I understood then. Chosen doesn't mean attacked. It doesn't mean killed. It means noticed, observed. The way they had followed the children in San Esteban, the way they had been present in every disappearance. They mark a life, watch it, and then, one day, they take it. Or maybe they take you somewhere else, to a place beyond comprehension. I tried to flee. I sold the apartment, moved cities. For weeks, it seemed like they weren't there. But the phone calls started, whispers on static, shadows in the corner of hotel rooms, the same pattern, a spiral, an hour frozen, a soft voice repeating a syllable I couldn't understand. Then came the photograph, the final proof. It arrived in an envelope with no return address. Inside was me, sleeping at my desk. Behind me, as always, two small figures, one hand raised, as if waving, the spiral drawn on the floor beneath them, and the words, scribbled in a childish but deliberate hand, "Your turn." I understood. The mimetics don't just imitate, they replace, they choose. They fold you into their pattern, into the cycle that has been repeating for decades. Every disappearance, every town emptied, every child who vanished, they were rehearsals. I am next. And so I write this. I record everything, because perhaps by documenting it, by leaving a trail, someone, someday, might notice, might understand, might survive where I cannot. If you're reading this, remember, some stories aren't just history. They are warnings, and some children are not children. They are something else, and they are always watching,